Ethan never expected that the quiet rustling of luggage in the hallway would become the sound that shattered his entire life. He watched from the doorway as Lydia hurriedly stuffed clothes into bags, whispering to the kids to stay quiet. There was no argument, no confrontation, just a cold, heavy realization that she was leaving him for another man and taking their children with her. But what Lydia didn't know was that Ethan also knew her darkest secret. She was still on probation, and crossing state lines would destroy her. Instead of begging her to stay, Ethan stepped outside, dialed a number he never thought he would call, and reported the violation. Hours later, flashing blue lights lit up the highway, and Lydia's escape collapsed in an instant. That single decision would ignite a chain reaction of arrests, courtroom battles, and devastating truths no one was prepared to face. Lydia moved quickly, almost frantically, as if every second she stayed in the house put her plan at risk. She kept her head down, avoiding Ethan's eyes while dragging suitcases across the wooden floor. The children watched her with a mixture of confusion and excitement, believing their mother's promise that they were going on a special trip. Ethan stood in the kitchen doorway, arms folded, his expression unreadable. He didn't ask where she was going. He didn't ask why she hadn't told him. He simply observed, memorizing every detail, because he already knew this wasn't just a spontaneous escape. It was a violation of her probation that could change everything. The holding cell was cold, and Lydia's anger simmered into a trembling mix of fear and disbelief as the charges were listed in front of her. She kept insisting it was all a misunderstanding, that she was being targeted, that Ethan had set her up. But the officers weren't moved. They had the alert, the violation, and her behavior during the arrest, all of it laid out clearly in black and white. While Lydia stewed in custody, Ethan drove the children home, still replaying everything that had led to this moment. He felt no victory, only exhaustion. He knew this was just the beginning. Lydia's past, the part she had always hidden behind excuses and half-truths, was about to come crashing into the light. At the station, Lydia was questioned about her probation. She tried to downplay it, claiming she had been compliant and only wanted to take a small trip. But the officers had already uncovered her full history: the forged prescriptions, the repeated warnings from her probation officer, and the incidents she had conveniently left out when trying to paint herself as a victim. Her file was thicker than she ever admitted. Chase arrived hours later, packing outside the station, looking like he had been hit by a truck. He had finally checked his messages, dozens of them from Ethan, from Melissa, and from Lydia's probation officer who had attempted to reach him when his name appeared in the report. When Ethan approached him outside, Chase didn't yell. He didn't defend Lydia. He just let out a long, defeated sigh. He confessed that Lydia had told him she was divorced. She told him she had full custody. She told him she wasn't on probation. She told him everything except the truth. And now, standing in front of Ethan, he realized he had been pulled into something far more dangerous and chaotic than an affair. "I didn't know," Chase muttered, rubbing his forehead. "She lied about all of it. I swear, I didn't know she was still married." His voice cracked with humiliation, and Ethan simply nodded. He wasn't interested in revenge. But he couldn't deny the small spark of relief that someone else finally saw the Lydia he had been dealing with for years. Inside the interrogation room, Lydia escalated from defensive to furious. She blamed Ethan for ruining her plans. She accused Chase of betraying her. She even lashed out at the officers, claiming they were targeting her unfairly. Every word, every outburst was documented. When they informed her she was being charged with resisting arrest, probation violation, and endangerment, she broke down. Not out of remorse, but out of shock that the consequences she thought she could avoid were now unavoidable. Meanwhile, Chase walked up to Ethan one last time before leaving. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't sign up for this. And I'm done with her." That single sentence marked the moment Lydia's deception fully unraveled. The double life she had tried to maintain, wife at home, lover in secret, criminal in denial, had finally collided, leaving nothing but wreckage behind. And for the first time, those around her began to see the truth Ethan had been living with all along. The courtroom was packed, and Lydia sat with her hands clenched tightly in her lap, her face pale but defiant. The judge called the session to order, and the prosecutor began outlining the case, detailing the probation violations, the resisting arrest, and the forged documents she had used in the past. Lydia's eyes darted around, looking for support, but all she found were empty chairs where her allies should have been. When it was her turn to speak, she launched into a rambling statement, blaming Ethan for orchestrating everything against her. She claimed he had manipulated the probation officer, coerced witnesses, and even staged the arrest. Her voice rose with each accusation, but the judge's expression remained stern, unmoved by her theatrics. Every claim she made was met with documentation and testimony that contradicted her words, and it became clear that her credibility was evaporating in real time. The prosecutor presented emails, texts, and recorded conversations showing Lydia had lied repeatedly to both Chase and the court. Each piece of evidence painted a picture of a woman willing to manipulate anyone to maintain control over her narrative. Even her own family members, called to testify, admitted they had warned Ethan about her behavior long before this chain of events began. Lydia's attempts to shift blame to Ethan grew increasingly desperate. She accused him of alienating the children, of influencing their testimony, and of fabricating evidence. The courtroom murmured, but the judge held firm, making it clear that speculation and emotion would not outweigh hard facts. Her strategy quickly crumbled when the probation officer recounted Lydia's history of noncompliance and deception. Every warning, every incident, every probation meeting she had skipped or manipulated was laid bare. The officers described how she had attempted to flee the state with the children, knowing it was illegal and dangerous. Each detail further undermined her position and left the jury questioning everything she had said. Lydia grew agitated, raising her voice, gesturing wildly, and even refusing to sit when directed. Her courtroom outbursts only reinforced the image of instability that the prosecution had been building. The judge warned her multiple times, but her refusal to cooperate only sealed her fate. When the verdicts were read, the room went silent. The judge declared that Lydia would serve the full term of her previous sentences and face additional charges for resisting arrest and probation violations. Her arguments, lies, and bluster had been rejected entirely. The judge emphasized that her behavior endangered the children and violated every trust placed in her by the legal system. Outside the courtroom, Ethan watched the chaos from a distance. He didn't feel triumph. He only felt relief that the children were finally safe and that the truth had been recognized. Lydia's family, who had been supportive before, now looked at her with a mixture of shock and disappointment. Ethan quietly gathered the children and left, knowing that although the battle had been long and painful, the first major victory in protecting them had been secured. Inside, Lydia sat stunned, the weight of her failures pressing down on her. For the first time, she realized that her lies, her manipulation, and her attempts to control everything had collapsed completely. The woman who had tried to escape consequences was now fully accountable to the law, and there was no turning back. The custody hearing began in a quiet courtroom, the air thick with tension. Ethan sat with the children beside him, their small hands clutching his tightly. Across the room, Lydia entered with her attorney, her expression guarded but defiant, trying to project control she no longer felt. The judge called the session to order and began reviewing the case, emphasizing that the best interest of the children was the court's primary concern. The prosecutor presented a series of documents and evidence that painted a clear picture of Lydia's instability. There were threatening letters she had sent to Ethan, messages full of anger and manipulation. There were probation violation records, showing repeated disregard for the law and for her obligations as a parent. A psychologist's report detailed Lydia's mental state, highlighting patterns of erratic behavior, poor judgment, and an inability to prioritize her children's safety. The testimony of the children was particularly impactful. The daughter spoke of a secret medicine that Lydia had given her, something that made her scared and confused. She described instances where her mother had tried to manipulate her feelings toward Ethan, creating a sense of loyalty conflict that frightened the court. The judge listened intently, recognizing the weight of a child's voice in determining custody and the undeniable influence of Lydia's actions on their well-being. The defense attempted to argue that Ethan was overreacting, that the children should maintain a relationship with their mother, and that Lydia's past mistakes should not determine her future. But each claim was systematically dismantled by the overwhelming evidence presented. Emails from Lydia's sister were read aloud, showing concern about Lydia's behavior and highlighting the risk she posed to her own children. Probation officers testified about Lydia's repeated attempts to evade supervision, directly contradicting her claims of responsible parenting. Ethan remained calm throughout, answering questions honestly and demonstrating his commitment to his children's safety and stability. He emphasized his consistent presence in their lives, his ability to provide a secure home, and his willingness to support their emotional needs. The contrast between him and Lydia's erratic conduct was stark, leaving a strong impression on the judge. After hours of testimony and review of evidence, the judge rendered the decision. Ethan was awarded full custody of the children, with Lydia granted only supervised visitation contingent upon completing her sentence and meeting specific behavioral conditions. The judge cited Lydia's history of probation violations, her deceptive behavior, and the psychological impact on the children as primary factors in the ruling. It was clear that the court prioritized the children's safety and emotional stability over Lydia's desire to maintain control. As the ruling was read, Ethan hugged his children tightly, feeling the relief of a burden lifted. Lydia sat motionless, her attorney quietly advising her on the limited options remaining. For the first time in a long while, the children were in a secure environment where their well-being was the unquestioned priority. Ethan left the courtroom with them, determined to rebuild their lives free from the chaos that Lydia had brought into their home. The custody hearing marked a definitive turning point, securing not just legal protection, but a foundation for the children's future and a chance for healing. Weeks after the custody ruling, new revelations began to surface, shaking the fragile sense of closure Ethan had felt. Melissa, Chase's wife, contacted him with information she could no longer ignore. She revealed that Lydia had engaged in multiple affairs over the years, providing emails and messages stored on her tablet as proof. Each message detailed interactions with different men, exposing a pattern of deception and manipulation that went far beyond Ethan's knowledge. Ethan felt a mix of anger and disbelief as he read through the correspondence. Lydia had lied not only to him and Chase, but to nearly everyone in her life. Her excuses, her manipulations, and the carefully constructed image of a devoted mother were completely dismantled. It became painfully clear that the chaos he had endured was only a fragment of a much larger web of deceit. Among the emails, there was one that struck Ethan harder than the rest. Lydia had written about a child with a man he did not recognize, referencing the possibility that this child might not be his. The thought of doubt gnawed at him, a cruel twist in an already painful saga. He had always questioned Lydia's honesty, but the possibility that his own son might not be biologically his shook him to the core. DNA tests were arranged immediately, and the waiting period was unbearable. Ethan struggled to maintain composure around the children, determined not to let them sense the turmoil he felt inside. When the results finally arrived, relief flooded him. The boy was indeed his. But even with this confirmation, the situation only deepened the understanding of Lydia's deceit. Her lies had been systematic, intentional, and calculated to manipulate everyone around her. The evidence from the tablet and emails became critical in ongoing legal considerations. Each revelation added layers to the case against Lydia, reinforcing the earlier findings of instability and unfitness as a parent. Ethan now understood the full extent of what had been hidden from him: the affairs, the lies, the secret communications, all designed to serve Lydia's interests while disregarding the impact on her children. Chase, still reeling from his own betrayal, confirmed the details and offered additional documentation of Lydia's manipulation. He admitted he had been entirely deceived and expressed regret for any role he had unknowingly played in her schemes. The combined evidence painted an unambiguous picture of Lydia as someone who repeatedly placed her desires above the safety and well-being of her family. Ethan realized that what had seemed like isolated incidents were actually part of a consistent pattern. The thought of his children being exposed to such manipulation and deceit was unbearable. He resolved to continue protecting them, ensuring that their lives would not be further disrupted by Lydia's actions. This phase of the legal battle was a harsh revelation. The past had been far worse than anyone had imagined. Ethan faced not only the logistical challenges of custody, but also the emotional burden of uncovering the true extent of Lydia's betrayals. Still, each new truth strengthened his determination to shield his children and to secure a stable, honest life for them. He knew that, while Lydia's actions could no longer harm the past, they would shape the vigilance required to protect the future. The final court session began under a tense atmosphere, the room filled with attorneys, probation officers, and family members. Lydia entered, her expression volatile, a mix of frustration and disbelief evident in every step. She had been anticipating this moment, yet nothing could have prepared her for the overwhelming weight of evidence stacked against her. The judge called the hearing to order, emphasizing that the focus would be entirely on the children's safety and Lydia's fitness as a parent. Lydia immediately tried to regain control, raising her voice and blaming Ethan for orchestrating her downfall. She accused everyone in the courtroom of conspiring against her, from the officers to the judge themselves. Her attorney attempted to temper her outbursts, but Lydia's behavior only escalated, further undermining her credibility. The prosecution began presenting evidence of Lydia's recent conduct while incarcerated. There were reports of fights in the facility, incidents of aggressive behavior, and documentation from mental health evaluations showing instability. Letters she had sent to the children, attempting to persuade them to defy court orders, were also submitted. Each piece painted a clear picture of a parent who was not only unfit, but actively endangering the emotional well-being of her children. Witnesses were called to testify about Lydia's behavior, including staff from the correctional facility and her own probation officers. They described repeated attempts by Lydia to manipulate situations for personal gain, often at the expense of the children. The court also reviewed her past patterns of deception, including the extramarital affairs and the manipulations revealed in the emails provided by Melissa and Chase. Lydia's attempts to deflect responsibility grew more desperate as the evidence mounted. She lashed out at the judge, accused Ethan of fabricating claims, and tried to argue that the children should still maintain unsupervised contact with her. The judge listened patiently, but every claim was systematically disproven by the overwhelming documentation and testimony. It became apparent that Lydia had lost all control over the narrative, and the courtroom was left with no doubt about her unfitness. The final decision was decisive. The judge terminated Lydia's parental rights completely, citing the ongoing risk she posed to the children's safety and emotional development. Lydia's ability to influence or make decisions for her children was legally ended, and she was only allowed supervised visitation under extremely strict conditions, contingent on future behavior. As the ruling was read, Lydia's face registered a mixture of shock anger, and despair, but there was no room for appeal within the immediate scope of the law. In the weeks following the ruling, additional reports emerged that Lydia was pregnant, reportedly with a correctional officer. This revelation added another layer of concern regarding her judgment and the environment she would create for any child she might bring into the world. Ethan, while troubled by the news, focused on ensuring the current children remained safe and secure. For the first time, Ethan could envision a life where the children were free from the chaos Lydia had brought into their lives. The court's ruling marked the absolute end of her influence over their upbringing. The children's safety, stability, and well-being were now fully protected, and Ethan committed himself to rebuilding their lives in an environment defined by trust, honesty, and peace. Lydia's complete loss of parental rights closed a chapter of turmoil, leaving behind a foundation for healing and a chance for the family to move forward without fear. The courtroom doors closed behind them, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt a sense of relief wash over him. The children clung to his sides, their small hands seeking comfort and reassurance, and he held them tightly, promising safety and stability. Lydia was gone from their daily lives, her influence and chaos finally removed by the full weight of the law. In the weeks that followed, Ethan focused on rebuilding a life defined by routine, security, and peace. He enrolled the children in school, reestablished family traditions, and slowly reintroduced laughter and normalcy into their days. Each moment of calm, each shared meal, and each bedtime story became a small victory, a reclaiming of the childhood stolen by Lydia's deceit. Ethan reflected on the journey, realizing the strength it had taken to endure the betrayal, manipulation, and endless legal battles. He knew the scars would remain, but they would not define the family's future. Closing the past behind him, Ethan resolved to move forward, dedicating himself entirely to his children's happiness and growth. Finally, he turned off the last notifications from court updates, closed the account that had tracked Lydia's actions, and breathed deeply. The family was free. For the first time, they could live without fear, without manipulation, and without the shadows of chaos. Ethan looked at his children and smiled, knowing that their new life had truly begun, built on trust, love, and the promise of a safe, bright future.